Welcome, seekers of truth. This is the place where myth awakens, prophecy unfolds, and the hidden becomes revealed. Here, where ancient faith meets revelation, where buried scriptures and hidden wisdom rise into the light. Every day at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, join us for a new revelation that may guide your soul. Subscribe, tap the bell, and share these blessings with your loved ones. Because God aids us in every situation at every time and showers His mercy upon us. A sky of ravens and steel. On the morning of September 25th, 1066, under a pale English sun, the fate of two worlds collided on a quiet riverside meadow outside Stamford Bridge. What unfolded there was not merely a clash of swords and shields. It was the final convulsion of the Viking Age, the last great attempt of the Norse to carve a kingdom in England, and the defiant stand of an English king against the tide of history. The story of Stamford Bridge is not simply a military chronicle. It is a tapestry woven from myth and memory, from the thunder of boots on the soil of Yorkshire to the whispers of sagas told in fire-lit halls. It is the tale of ambition and betrayal, of destiny and exhaustion, of gods and men, a drama where Odin's ravens hovered over warriors and where the prayers of Christian monks clashed with the old pagan fury of the North. It is the story of how English knights shattered the Viking dream of conquest, the last great Viking. To understand Stamford Bridge, one must first know the man at the heart of the storm, Harald Hardrada, King of Norway. Hardrada was no ordinary monarch. Born in 1015, his youth had been baptized in fire when, at just 15, he fought at Stiklestad beside his half-brother Olaf, a battle lost, sending the boy into exile. But exile did not break him, it reforged him. Hardrada wandered east, entering the service of the Byzantine emperor as a commander of the fabled Varangian Guard. In the marble palaces of Constantinople and across campaigns in Sicily, Bulgaria, and the Holy Land, he honed his skills. Chronicles describe him as towering in stature, fierce in gaze, wealthy beyond measure, and ruthless beyond reason. When he returned north, he did so not as a fugitive, but as a warlord with treasure, scars, and ambition. The sagas gave him a name, Hardrada, the Hard Ruler. To the Norse, he was almost mythic, a living echo of the berserker kings of old. To his enemies, he was a storm wrapped in flesh. And now, in 1066, he set his gaze on England. Tostig's betrayal. But Hardrada did not sail alone. By his side was Tostig Godwinson, the exiled Earl of Northumbria and brother to King Harold of England. Tostig's fall had been steep. Once powerful, his tyranny in Northumbria had turned his own people against him. Cast out by rebellion and forsaken by his kin, his heart curdled into venom. To Tostig, Hardrada's ambition was opportunity. If Norway's king could seize England, Tostig would rise again, perhaps even claim a throne of his own. Revenge was his lodestar, and vengeance his only prayer. Here lies the first psychological fracture of Stamford Bridge. It was not merely foreign invasion, but civil war, brother against brother. In the Norse sagas, fratricide was the deepest curse, and in Christian scripture, Cain's murder of Abel marked the birth of human sin. In 1066, that ancient shadow resurfaced on English soil, the dragon fleet. From the cold waters of Norway, Hardrada's fleet swept forth, a forest of over 300 longships. Their prows bore the snarling beasts of Norse legend, dragons, serpents, and ravens carved in wood but alive with symbolism. The longship itself was a cultural weapon. Sleek, fast, shallow drafted, it could glide into rivers, strike deep inland, and vanish like a phantom. It was as much a psychological terror as a physical one. The very sight of dragon-headed ships on the horizon had haunted England for centuries. But this was no raid. This was conquest. Nearly 8,000 men sailed with Hardrada, veterans of war, clad in mail and leather, wielding axes that could split helmets in a single blow. They were not pirates, but an army. When they landed in Yorkshire and defeated the local earls at Fulford Gate, the north seemed theirs. York itself surrendered. For a brief moment, the Viking dream of dominion returned, England once more within their grasp. Yet fate, ever cruel, was already shaping its counterstroke. The king who marched like a storm in the south, King Harold Godwinson, awaited another threat. William, Duke of Normandy, who prepared his own invasion. Harold had guarded the coast for weeks, his men weary but steadfast, scanning the channel for sails that never came. Then word reached him. The north burned, York had fallen, and Hardrada claimed England's crown. Harold's response was not caution, but fire. He marched north with breathtaking speed, nearly 185 miles in 4 days. Chroniclers marveled at the feat. His housecarls, hardened warriors, marched shoulder to shoulder with levied farmers, through rain and mud, sleeping little, eating less, yet never faltering. Here was not just a king, but a commander of resolve. Medieval warfare was as much about endurance as swords. Harold's forced march was a weapon sharper than steel. He moved faster than rumor, faster than fear itself. By the time Hardrada's scouts brought news, the English army was already upon them. The Bridge of Doom. On that September morning, the Vikings rested near Stamford Bridge, expecting a routine exchange of hostages. Many left their armor behind in the city of York, seeking relief from the sun. Then the horizon darkened with dust. The earth quaked with thousands of marching feet. Harold Godwinson had arrived. In the panic, one figure emerged, a lone Viking warrior, said to be giant in stature, who held the narrow bridge against wave after wave of Englishmen. With a great two-handed axe, he cut down dozens, buying precious time for his comrades. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle claims he stood nearly an hour, unstoppable until a soldier crept beneath the bridge and thrust a spear upward into his body. This solitary stand entered legend, an echo of Thermopylae, a Norse Leonidas upon English soil. In him, the Viking spirit shone brightest just before it flickered out. Clash of shield walls. With the bridge taken, Harold's army surged across the river. The Vikings scrambled into formation, their shield wall rising like an iron cliff. Though many lacked armor, their discipline and ferocity held. The English met them in thunder, spears shattering, swords clashing, men grappling and dying in the crush. At the center, Hardrada himself fought like a demigod. Towering above his men, he swung his sword in great arcs, a blue cloak trailing behind him. Norse skalds would later sing of him as if he were Odin incarnate, the raven feeder, striking down foes by the dozen. But fate, or perhaps providence, intervened. An English arrow pierced his throat. The King of Norway, the last great Viking, fell upon the field. His banner, land waster, dipped toward the earth. The raven of the Norse sagas folded its wings. Still, the battle raged. Harold offered clemency to his brother Tostig, calling for reconciliation. Tostig refused, defiant even in the shadow of death. Soon he too lay among the slain. The Viking line collapsed. Panic spread. Warriors fled toward the river, only to be cut down or drowned in bloodied waters. Of the hundreds of ships that had brought them, barely 24 sufficed to carry the survivors home. Myth, faith, and the end of an age. The Battle of Stamford Bridge did more than decide the fate of a crown. It symbolized the end of an era. For centuries, the Norse had been Europe's terror. From the monasteries of Lindisfarne to the palaces of Paris, their raids had shaped medieval consciousness. They were the hammer of Thor striking Christendom. Yet by 1066, Christianity had taken root even in Scandinavia. The sagas and the saints clashed within the same minds. Hardrada himself had walked between worlds, a Christian king, but a warrior shaped by pagan ethos. His death at Stamford Bridge was more than military defeat. It was myth's surrender to history. Theology, too, offers layers. In Norse belief, warriors slain in glory ascended to Valhalla, feasting in Odin's hall until Ragnarok. In Christian chronicles, however, their fall was framed as divine judgment. the triumph of the cross over the raven banner. Both faiths interpreted the same clash as validation of destiny. Psychologically, Stamford Bridge shattered the Viking self-image. They had long believed themselves invincible upon English soil. But here, their dream drowned in the Derwent River. The saga of conquest closed. The Pyrrhic victory. For Harold Godwinson, victory brought no rest. His men were exhausted, their numbers thinned. Even as the corpses cooled on the field, a messenger arrived with grim tidings. William of Normandy had landed in the south. In a cruel twist, the very triumph that secured England from the north left it vulnerable to the south. Within 3 weeks, Harold would march again, this time to Hastings, where his fate would be sealed not by Vikings, but by Normans. Thus, Stamford Bridge was both a triumph and a curse, a victory that bled into catastrophe. The aftermath. Ashes of the Raven Banner. The fields of Stamford Bridge were silent by dusk. The cries of the dying had faded, leaving only the cawing of carrion birds circling above. Where once the Raven Banner of Norway had flown, there now lay broken spears and shattered shields. Chroniclers tell us that only 24 ships remained to carry the survivors back across the North Sea. From a fleet of over 300, the Viking host had been reduced to a shadow. For the first time in centuries, the Norse were not just repelled, they were broken. In monasteries across England, monks wrote that God had delivered judgment, striking down the pagan invaders in a single blow. In the sagas of Iceland, however, the memory was preserved with grim pride. Hardrada had died as a warrior should, beneath the sky, sword in hand. Both versions became truth, depending on who told the story. Thus, Stamford Bridge entered the realm of memory, both as a Christian miracle and a pagan tragedy. Crossroads of destiny, England's double burden. The victory at Stamford Bridge was dazzling, but it carried a shadow. King Harold Godwinson's army was exhausted. Their strength bled into the soil of Yorkshire. Barely had the dead been buried when news thundered from the south. William of Normandy had landed. The king turned his weary men around and began another forced march, this time toward Hastings. Here lies the cruel irony. The very speed and ferocity that allowed Harold to crush the Vikings left him weakened against the Normans. Stamford Bridge was both a triumph and a trap, draining England's strength days before its greatest trial. The psychology of fate weighs heavily here. Did Harold believe himself divinely chosen after defeating Hardrada? Or did the shadow of exhaustion already gnaw at his mind? Chronicles leave us hints but no certainty. What we know is that England stood at a crossroads, and fate had no mercy. Myth and memory, from sagas to Shakespeare. The resonance of Stamford Bridge did not die with the warriors. It rippled through literature, myth, and imagination for centuries. In Norse sagas, Hardrada was remembered as a king of unmatched boldness, his death framed as glorious, almost destined. His fall became the closing verse of the Viking Age. In English chronicles, the lone Viking at the bridge became legend, a tale retold in fire-lit halls as proof of courage and madness intertwined. In later literature, echoes of Stamford Bridge appear in Shakespeare's histories, where ambition and betrayal bring down kings, and in Tolkien's worlds, where Rohirrim riders and northern warriors carry the spirit of Anglo-Saxon shield walls. Even psychology finds roots here. The lone man holding the bridge has been studied as an archetype of defiance, a symbol of individual sacrifice against overwhelming odds. He stands beside Leonidas at Thermopylae or Roland at Roncesvalles, part of humanity's eternal myth of the last stand. Modern reflections. The day the Viking Age died. Why does Stamford Bridge still matter? Because it was not just a battle, it was the turning of an age. Historically, it marked the last great Viking attempt at conquest, the final echo of an age of longships and raiders. Culturally, it symbolized the transition from the heroic age of sagas to the centralized, bureaucratic medieval kingdoms that would dominate Europe. Theologically, it was remembered as a clash between the old gods and the new, Odin's ravens falling silent before the cross of Christ. Psychologically, it reveals the cost of ambition, Hardrada's hunger for empire, Tostig's thirst for revenge, Harold's desperate need to defend his realm. Even in modern times, military strategists study Harold's forced march, a feat of logistics rarely equaled. Leaders reflect on the lesson: a victory can sow the seeds of defeat if won at too high a cost. Stamford Bridge teaches us that history does not move in single battles, but in chains of consequence. Without this triumph, there might never have been a Hastings. Without Hastings, England, and perhaps the world, would have taken an entirely different shape. On that September day, the Viking dream died. But in its death, the stage was set for the Norman conquest and the birth of a new England. Ravens fall, silent. The Battle of Stamford Bridge was the last great Viking invasion of England. From that day forward, no Norse king would ever again dream of conquest on English shores. The fields of Yorkshire bore witness to a turning point. It was not merely the death of Hardrada or the fall of Tostig, but the end of the Viking Age itself. And yet, in literature, memory, and myth, the battle lives on. The lone Viking at the bridge, the arrow in Hardrada's throat, the brother refusing clemency, all echo like verses in an eternal saga. History is shaped not only by victory, but by the dreams that die upon the battlefield. And on that September day in 1066, the Viking dream died beneath the swords of England. You've just unlocked another chapter of sacred truth, and your journey with God's wisdom continues. Return tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, when a fresh revelation may brighten your path and strengthen your faith. Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss a blessing-laden episode. Share this scroll of knowledge with family and friends. For when truth is shared, God's mercy envelops us, guiding and blessing in every circumstance. Your curiosity is our compass. Tell us in the comments which mystery you'd like to explore next, and together we'll unveil it by His grace. Until next time, stay faithful, stay watchful. May God's mercy and blessings be upon you always.